My friends, I think the Ukrainska Armia is preparing a big surprise for the Russian army. For this shock factor, the Ukrainians could combine their offensive on Zaporizhzhia with several large-scale amphibious operations across the Kakhovka Reservoir in Energodar in order to flank Russian fortifications in Zaporizhzhia and threaten their entire line of supplies. This attack could be supported by simultaneous landings in Kherson to secure the Antonov Bridge as well as the Novakhovka Dam in order to establish a bridgehead over the Dnieper. Although amphibious operations have a high risk associated with them, if done right, they can definitely break the deadlock. The same way the Egyptians broke through the heavily fortified Suez Canal in October 1973. More on that later. Now, there are several clues that brought me towards this possibility. Clue number 1, the 47th Mechanized Brigade. A couple days ago, I talked about Ukraine's offensive brigades that are being formed and trained at the rear for their upcoming offensive. And I showed you this Twitter post that said, fighters of Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade continue to master their skills for the upcoming Ukrainian offensive. I truly believe that if we want to understand the full spectrum of Ukrainian possibilities for this offensive, we have to take a closer look at this unit. Because in this other post, we see this same Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade, but this time equipped with multiple M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, all with some badass green digital camo with some nets on top. And alongside all of these vehicles, we can even see a modernized M55S tank. Perhaps this footage is from the same 47th Brigade. We see a lot of Western equipment, some Humvees, some M113, but most importantly, I counted at least 15 M2 Bradleys in this minute-long footage. With this top-tier equipment, it's clear that the 47th Mechanized Brigade will play an important role in the upcoming offensive. Yet, I noticed something strange by looking at more footage from this unit. In this video, we see them training, they all look so professional, elite level. But hold on, what is this vehicle? This is a Soviet-era BDSM-2. Wrong, no. BRDM-2 Amphibious Armored Scout Car. And somehow it just flashed. This mechanized brigade could very well partake in amphibious landings. Especially since the M2 Bradley is said to perform very well in cross-country open terrain, and using a floating curtain, it can even become amphibious. And I think this is the key. On top of this, there might be Western military equipment that was delivered to Ukraine but that was not publicly announced. Check out this article from Forbes. To make the standoff over the Dnieper River count, send Ukraine amphibious vehicles. And on the picture below, we see a South Korean AAV-7 amphibious assault vehicle. Apparently, the US Marine Corps possesses over 1,300 of them. As of March 2023, the plan is to transfer 76 surplus AAV-7 assault amphibious vehicles to Greece. However, we've seen this happen multiple times. Then from Greece, they could be sent to Ukraine. Meanwhile, in this article from the Ukrainian military, we're told that Ukraine received X number of Sherp shuttles that can easily carry an entire platoon of 30 men. So as to summarize clue number 1, while the entire attention of the media is focused on the Leopard 2s and the Challengers, I sense much greater secrecy regarding amphibious equipment. Clue number 2, bridge laying equipment. Once again, according to an article of the Ukraine military dating back to 15th of March 2023, the Netherlands will transfer German-made M3 amphibious rig bridging vehicles to Ukraine. But more importantly, these M3 rigs are made specifically to be able to sustain the heavy weight of Leopard 2s and Challenger 2s, as well as the weight of the M1A2 Abrams. And 3 rigs joined together may carry up to the equivalent of 2 MBTs. Now, this is extremely interesting as we see more and more footage of NATO military equipment reaching the front line. Here you can see a column of German Marder infantry fighting vehicles on a training ground learning to bypass anti-tank Dragon's Teeth. Or what about this very impressive column of 10 Leopard 2s moving through mud somewhere in Ukraine. Some pictures were also released of Challengers 2 in full camo netting somewhere near the front. Now, disclaimer for naval bots. Although these tanks are impressive, they're not invincible either. So don't freak out if you see videos of a bunch of them getting destroyed. If Ali was able to destroy them in Syria, Yuri can probably do the same. But all these heavy MBTs needs specific bridge laying equipment. Now you need 8 M3 rigs to bridge a 100-meter water gap. Knowing that the smallest gap on the Dnieper River is 400 meters, Ukrainians would need, in theory, at least 32 M3 rigs per crossing. And the article from the Ukrainian military says in detail, the number of vehicles planned to be transferred is not specified. Of course! If you know how many are transferred, you know exactly what their purpose will be. I couldn't find how many the Netherlands have, but I know that Germany has 30 units and the UK has 38 units. And very interesting, South Korea ordered 110 units to be delivered by 2024. So perhaps it's going to be used to cross big rivers, or perhaps simply because Soviet-era bridges are not strong enough to sustain the weight of these MBTs. Let me know in the comments. Or a simpler solution would be to use the M3 amphibious rigs as a ferry by attaching 3 platforms together to bring 2 tanks from one riverbank to another. They can cross a 400-meter river one way within 15 minutes. At a rate of 2 main battle tanks every 30 minutes, Ukrainians could disembark 14 Challenger 2s in only 3.5 hours. Welcome to History Legends. Here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. Remember that if you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, just like with many other commentators, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. So thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Clue number 3, the Kherson landing. On the 23rd of April, the media went nuts when some Ukrainian troops landed in the low-lying areas on the other bank of Kherson, where they managed to capture the village of Dachi. Now, the Western media kept pushing the narrative that this was it, this was the start of the Great Offensive. And then came maps of massive breachheads, when in reality the true area of control of these Ukraine groupings was much smaller. However, this announcement was enough to cause a massive panic on the Russian Telegram channels. So quickly after, some Russian soldiers posted this video to refute the claims that the Ukrainian army had established a breachhead over the Dnieper. And as of now, the Russians have regained control of the entire area. Anyway, what's interesting is that Ukrainians did so by infiltrating the Dnieper using speedboats. In this case, we can see one of the boats carrying 2 Ukrainian soldiers. However, as you can imagine, these make a lot of noise. So German newspaper Bild made a video about how the Ukrainians are now using kayaks. These kayaks are lightweight. It allows the troops to move silently across the river. And one of the most important factors of these kayaks is that they have a very small infrared signature, which is very important for night operations, as you can imagine. So in their video, Bild said that there were 40 Ukrainian Marines getting trained. But I'm just thinking out loud, if we have 2 men per kayak, if we want to move a company across the river, we need at least 60 kayaks. So yeah, it could definitely be done. Although the Russians claim victory over this event, claiming that they managed to repulse the Ukrainian attempt to build a breachhead over the Dnieper, I personally see it differently. I don't think there was a serious attempt for the Ukrainians to build a breachhead. Just by looking at the amount of troops deployed, it's not enough. These were simple Ukrainian probing attacks that happen regularly. What it showed me is that Ukraine is able to cross over the Dnieper with small groups without being intercepted. Because let's be honest, it's very hard for the Russians to catch these boats on the move. Now I know that the Russians have established multiple defensive positions along the river like this MG nest. So that's why the Russians claim that even these kayak attacks are suicidal and that they're very easy to spot. And lastly, we only saw footage of Ukrainian infiltration teams that had been spotted by the Russians, but not the ones that went in and out undetected, because the terrain in the Kherson Delta is made of wetlands and swamps. Soldiers that disembark cannot really dig in, and all the small islands make it impossible to sustain large amount of forces. In the end, a lot of these recon groups that crossed over in front of Kherson were spotted and targeted by Russian artillery. Ukrainians also disembarked some troops at this geolocation on Veliki Island, right at the Dnieper's delta, allegedly men from the 73rd Marine Special Operations Center, the same guys that operated on Snake Island. Once again, the Russian Air Force was quick to react and dropped 2 guided FAB-500 bombs on this Ukrainian position. This goes to show that there is good coordination between troops on the ground identifying the targets, who then pass it on to the pilots, which is something relatively new in the Russian military because they've been working on it for a year now. After this amphibious operation on the 25th of April, Ukrainians carried artillery strikes on the entire opposite bank of the Dnieper. And here you can see the results of this bombardment. This means that Ukrainians definitely have some strength in the Kherson sector. In response, the Russians fired some ATGMs at an observation post hidden in some building on the other bank of the Dnieper. You know me, I'm a pessimist, but what is in fact worrying for the Ukrainians is that it was reported on the 25th of April that Russian air defense has shot down an Su-25 of the Ukrainian Air Force. I don't know how many fighter jets Ukraine has left, but because the discussions about receiving F-16s are increasing more and more, it's very possible that their Soviet-era aviation has been severely depleted. The Russian army take the threat on the Kherson front seriously, because in this picture we see hangars that were destroyed by Russian FABs. It's also interesting the rate at which the Russians have been stepping up the rate of fabbing, which makes me question Ukrainian anti-air capabilities in this sector. As a summary of clue number 3, this probing attack confirmed what a lot of analysts have been thinking, that the Russian army does not have enough forces to fully cover the riverbank of the Dnieper, and the armed forces of Ukraine clearly know this. Clue number 4, the Sunday Times article on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I'm doing a lot of throwbacks, but remember the video I posted on the last day of August. At the very end, I told you about our large-scale Ukrainian amphibious operation against the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Energadar. But what happened at the Zaporizhzhia power plant? Now, as it's fresh news, we don't really know what happened, but reportedly, Ukraine commandos landed in 5 locations. Some people say as many as 700 commandos. If I have more information, I'll let you know. But I think the most believable is that it was 64 commandos in 7 boats, speedboats. And a lot of people did not believe that this event ever happened. Well. Here from the Sunday Times. Ukraine's secret attempt to retake the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. What did I tell you? And what does the article talk about? Oh my god, look at that! Are 600 commandos? Whoa! If only somebody told you about it! Apparently they attacked with 30 speedboats. Honestly, this article was very interesting because it even interviews Ukrainian troops that participated in this raid. One Ukrainian officer said, the idea was that this would be an infantry-only battle. They wouldn't be able to use artillery against us, as this is a nuclear plant. Once the Ukrainian boats had neared the shoreline, the Russian guns opened up, forcing the soldiers to change directions. Now what we learned from the article is that the Ukrainians were facing heavy fire while crossing over the reservoir. The losses were mounting and eventually the Ukraine commander called off the attack. Only one group of commandos managed to land. Those are probably the 60 commandos that was widely reported on Telegram. And in my first videos when I told you about NATO's involvement in planning Ukrainian offensive operations, the Sunday Times writes, word for word, asked whether the US had provided targets for the HIMARS before the raid. A US defense source confirmed that time-sensitive intelligence was provided to Ukrainian special forces, although they declined to give specific details. We do share information with them, but they're responsible for the selection, prioritization, and ultimate decisions to engage threats. Essentially, they're shifting the blame. And the cherry on top is that this article claims that this raid took place on the very last day of October. It's very strange because all the videos that were released and all the posts about this 600-man commando operation were posted on September 1st. And since then, there were no other reports of such a raid on the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Look at the map that Rybar posted on September 1st. It's exactly the same map, which coincides exactly with that one grouping that made it to shore. And here you can see one of the transport barges that was destroyed by the Russians. Anyway, I hope that this is convincing enough. Now we might wonder why they changed the dates of this operation. One possibility is that at the exact same moment in late August, like the 31st of August and September 1st, The Guardian confirms here that personnel of the International Atomic Energy Agency were to visit the facilities of the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Now the reason why Clue 4 is important is that it showed the Ukrainians that infantry-only amphibious raids don't work. The commandos already had artillery support, but it wasn't enough. They need armored support on the ground. And the Ukrainian army learned that using lots of smaller boats is better than using a handful of large vessels that can easily be targeted. Are you starting to connect the dots? Operation Badr, October 1973. Long story short, in 1973, Egypt wanted its revenge against Israel after its debacle in the 1967 Six-Day War. The question was how to break through the impressive sand wall along the Suez Canal, as this was the first barrier of the Israeli Bar-Lev line of defense. It was 25 meters high and at an angle of 45 to 60 degrees, supported by an underneath structure in concrete. The Egyptians calculated that with bulldozers and explosives, that it would require at least 6 hours of uninterrupted work for each passage. Meanwhile, the Israelis greatly underestimated the Egyptians and believed it would take them at least 12 hours. The idea was for the Egyptians to waste enough time on this sand wall for the Israelis to send reinforcements. On October 6, the first wave of Egyptian assault infantry armed with anti-tank weapons and supported by combat engineers, roughly 4,000 men, paddled across the canal in thousands of small rubber dinghies. While the infantry was fighting to secure the breachhead, this is where Egyptian combat engineers demonstrated their ingenuity. The solution they came up with was water cannons used for mining. Before the war, Egypt bought 300 British-made hydraulic pumps and another 150 units of more powerful German-made ones. Instead of explosives, they figured out that the combination of 3 British pumps and 2 German ones could clear an opening in the sand wall within 2 hours. Once the passages were cleared, engineers built bridges, pontoons, and ferries to transport heavy equipment such as tanks and trucks. For real, Egyptian combat engineers carried the team on that battle. Once they were done with the sand walls and the bridges, they went forward to open up pathways across minefields and then help the infantry destroy enemy bunkers. Operation Badr was a real feat of arms of the Egyptian army. During this attack, the Egyptians lost 280 KIA and 20 tanks, while the defending Israelis lost 950 KIA and 2,000 wounded, plus allegedly up to 400 tanks. Because the Israelis did not expect to face hordes of Egyptian infantrymen armed with RPG-7s or wire-guided 83 Sagers. Ukraine's great amphibious assault. Now let's put all the clues together, plus the cherry of the Operation Badr on top. And now we get a beautiful cake. You know how much I love cake. Let's take another look at the map of Russian fortifications in Ukraine. Those are geolocated through satellite imagery. It's obvious that any offensive against the open terrain of Zaporizhzhia will face a brick wall. It will be a massacre. Ukrainian formations will have to break through multiple lines of fortifications, anti-tank ditches, dragon teeth, everything made to create massive traffic jams, aka kill zones. However, notice how this section here around the Zaporizhzhia power plant doesn't seem to have any large concentration of fortified positions. The Russians expect the natural barrier of the Dnieper river and the reservoir to act like a repellent. And just like the Egyptians in 1973, I see 3 locations where the Ukrainians could carry these amphibious landings. In each of these scenarios, we know that Ukrainians are massing all their offensive brigades near Dnieper instead of attacking south towards the Sea of Azov. The deception could be to move west towards Nikopol and Kherson and attack across the Dnieper instead, a bit like Alexander the Great did at the Battle of Hydaspes. Number 1. A renewed attack against Energodar. Supported by multiple amphibious infantry fighting vehicles, the Ukrainians would quickly establish their breachhead. They could use the cover of the ZAPP to strengthen their positions and receive reinforcements, while the Russians might be hesitant to fire and launch airstrikes in the direction of the power plant. At the same time, this window of opportunity could allow the Ukrainians to flank all three lines of Russian fortifications, cause panic and tickle deep into enemy rears, and essentially open the gate for the bulk of Ukrainian forces to push towards Tokmak and take the city into a pincer. Once this is done, the next step would be to combine forces and strike towards Melitopol. Number 2. Ukrainians could launch a river crossing operation near Kupiansk. They could surprise the Russians with a flanking maneuver somewhere along the Oskil River and force them to abandon their pressure on Kupiansk and push them to retreat up until the Luhansk border. Number 3. Ukrainians could launch multiple special forces raids across the Dnieper in the area of Kherson, but the main targets would be the Novakhovka Dam and the sector of the Antonov Bridge in Kherson city, simply because these large structures are the easiest way to transport reinforcements and supplies on the east bank of the Dnieper. Now you'll tell me, hold on, the Russians have fortified the riverbank. Yes, it's true, but as we're speaking, Ukrainians are using satellite imagery provided by the West to study every inch of trench line and fortification built by the Russians. And all these coordinates will be provided directly to Ukrainian artillery that will launch a devastating bombardment. Step 1 will be to secretly transport enough special forces across the Dnieper and find the weak spots in the Russian defense. Then ship over hundreds of Marines to hold the ground and push back any Russian counterattacks. Once this is done, Ukrainian combat engineers could build several pontoon bridges to bring even more reinforcements. And what's very interesting is that at this moment, we all know the Antonov Bridge is destroyed. However, the goal could be to secure a large breachhead beyond the Antonov Bridge. There are reports that since December, American engineers were given the task to find a way to restore the bridge within 12 hours. The task will be done by Ukrainian combat engineers. Obviously, the details are not known, but the general idea is that they want to connect several self-propelled barges to the already existing structure and then turn it into a single thread. But if they manage to repair the Antonov Bridge, this could allow heavy equipment of elite Ukrainian mechanized brigades armed with NATO tanks and infantry fighting vehicles to make their way on the other bank of the river unscattered. And these fresh units can push beyond the bridgehead. Now I think that this video deserves a part 2, because the biggest problem that the Ukrainians would face in such operations would be anti-air defense, which is exactly the same problems that the Egyptians faced during their offensive in Sinai during the Yom Kippur War. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment sections what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.